When I was really deep into my gaming craze growing up, Collect-A-Thon platformer games were undoubtedly my genre of choice. This was before I discovered my bottomless love for RPGs, and I played as many of these games as I could. Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, Donkey Kong 64, Jak and Daxter, even some of the later games that could qualify in this genre. And so, when I heard that there was a bunch of ex-Rare employees getting together to form a studio and bring back the genre with a banjo-inspired buddy duo Collect-A-Thon platformer called Yooka-Laylee, I was all for it. Full disclosure before I get into the meat of this review, yes, I did back this project, specifically for a PlayStation 4 digital copy, which is the version I'll be playing for this video. After other reviews started to come out and reactions were rather mixed, I was starting to get a little bit worried. Were we getting another Mighty No. 9 situation? Was this another Kickstarter project that had promised us the moon and then mooned us? Well, thankfully no. This game is definitely the return of the Collect-A-Thon, in all the good ways and the bad. So what's the story here? Well, the evil business CEO, Capital B, assisted by his VP of Evil, Dr. Quack, owner of the massive polluting industrial business Hivory Towers, have invented a machine to steal all the books in the world, extracting the knowledge and stories therein, and then charge people for the privilege of accessing that knowledge. However, their even more sinister plot is to try and find the One Book, a mythical relic that can apparently rewrite the entire universe. Not that that plot point ever gets expanded upon or anything. Cut to our buddy duo for this game, Yooka the Lizard and Laylee the Bat. They're out in their new home of Shipwreck Cove enjoying a nice picnic when all of a sudden the book that Laylee found in the chest in their skeleton of a ship, which of course just happens to be the One Book, is pulled away by Capital B's machine. Luckily, however, all of the pages in the One Book are sentient, and all of them abandon ship as soon as they sense danger. Now, with some assistance from their friends, Yooka and Laylee need to find all of the pages, get back the One Book, and stop Capital B's evil corporate agenda. The story here is pretty basic, but it definitely serves its purpose. I wasn't exactly expecting grand storytelling. I'd say that the story is more involved than Banjo-Kazooie's story was, but it's less complex than Tooie. And strap in, folks, because there are going to be a lot of Banjo comparisons, both good and bad. In fact, as we move into talking about the characters, this might be a good time to address this. This game really wants to remind you of Banjo-Kazooie. A lot. Like, to the point where it sort of shoots itself in the foot. The game is so heavily influenced by Banjo-Kazooie that most of the time it really just feels like BK with a different skin. Well, I suppose that was part of the idea, but it's so close in style and substance that if you've played either of the N64 Banjo games, you're going to be comparing this to those games from the first cutscene onward, and it never really manages to step out of the shadow of its predecessors. And that becomes evident as soon as you listen to Yooka and Laylee start talking to each other. Laylee is just straight up Kazooie. She's blunt, snarky, sarcastic, and probably my favorite character in this game just because she has no filter, or at least as close to no filter as one can have in an all-ages game like this. Yooka is basically a more intelligent, more competent Banjo, but consequently he's also boring as hell, with no real personality to speak of. Even as a straight man to Laylee's sarcasm, he doesn't even really exhibit a lot of the traits that made Banjo an actual character. I mean, Banjo wasn't exactly a nuanced personality, but I have a much easier time remembering his dialogue than I do Yooka's. The main villain, Capital B, actually does manage to stand out as more than just a stand-in for Gruntilda, if only because unlike Grunty's rhyming shtick, which she ditched from the second game onward, B's constant use of business buzzwords and corporate slang and puns based around industry do make him a more standout character in his own right, even if he does keep some of the trappings of his predecessor. Look, he even taunts you while you're going through his lair, though he doesn't have nearly as varied a lexicon of taunts as I would have liked. Most of the other characters do their job as either facilitators of challenges for pages, such as Kartos and Rextro who show up in every world, or stand-ins for other well-known BK characters. Dr. Puzz is the transformation expert in the same way that Mumbo and Humbawumba were in the Banjo games, or the Ghost Riders, who are basically the stand-ins for the Jinjos. They don't leave a strong impression really, though some of their dialogue did get me to chuckle, particularly Rextro's attempts at updating himself to try and fit in with a more modern game. Moving on to gameplay, well, again, if you've played any Collect-A-Thon platformer, more specifically the Banjo games, you will feel right at home here. The game is basically one giant hub world, and hidden around this hub world are different books that act as portals into different worlds. By expending the pages you've collected, you can travel into these worlds where you can gather up more pages and also quills. Pages, as mentioned, are needed to unlock the worlds, but also expand them, which we'll get into later. And the quills found scattered around every world are used as a currency to learn new moves from Trowser the Snake. Ha! But also have a more annoying and insidious purpose, which again I'll talk about a little later. In order to earn pages, you basically just wander around the world, talk to the characters there, and either solve their problems or solve some platforming challenges or puzzles that are laid out in front of you. Some of them are more obvious than others, but by completing them, you'll earn more pages for progression. Sometimes, though, you might also need to find other items or perform other tasks in order to actually attempt these challenges. For example, in the first world, you can race this cloud for a pagey around the dry course, but later on, when you get the ability to flood and freeze the race course, you can race her again for a second pagey. And then there's Rextro, who won't let you play his arcade game, which can potentially net you 2 pages in every stage, until you've found the Rextro coin, which is hidden in every stage. You have to find the Mollycool in each stage before Dr. Puzz can initiate the transformation. And then, of course, there are numerous challenges that you can't beat or even start until you've learned the proper move from Trowser. Exploring and solving all these different puzzles and challenges is great fun and really brings out what makes these sorts of games so special and enjoyable, which explains why so many people, myself included, were scrambling for a brand new addition to the genre almost 20 years later. The game is actually pretty good at telegraphing to you exactly what you need to do in order to perform each challenge, and plenty of characters will flat out tell you if you don't have the right move for a specific challenge, or at the very least hint at what you need to be able to do. And then there's expanding the worlds. See, the game only has 5 worlds to explore, not counting the hub world itself, which yes, does have a few pages hidden in its nooks and crannies as well, but you don't get the full experience when you first unlock the world. See, after you've unlocked the world, you also have the option to spend more pages to expand it. Once expanded, the worlds become much, much larger, and a huge new variety of challenges becomes available to you, allowing you to take on even more challenges and collect more goodies. The game is fairly wonderfully paced, and if you're the explorative type, you will almost never have to worry about not having enough pages or quills for progression. In fact, on my very first playthrough, I managed to get all the way through the 5 worlds without having to backtrack once, despite gaining new moves that made it possible to complete challenges that I couldn't before, or in some cases just outright break them. The exception was when I got to the door leading to the final boss. See, in order to confront the final boss, you need to have collected a total of at least 100 of the 145 pages in the game. I had about 90 when I first got there. But a quick backtrack to the first world and a bit more poking around the hub world, and I was easily able to make up the difference. And I was never lacking in quills to pay Trowser the Snake for new moves after the first world. Unfortunately, that's where the cracks started to show a bit in the game, and as I got further in, I started to notice a bit more of the repetition that made me lose my drive to keep exploring each world to their fullest. First, the quills. There are 200 of these suckers in every stage, but you only need a total of about 400 or so out of the 1010, yes you heard that right, that are in the game to purchase all of the moves from Trowser the Snake. So what's the point of collecting the quills after you have all the moves? Well, as it turns out, one of the 25 pages located in each world will only be given to you if you manage to pick up all 200 quills in a stage. This is rather ridiculous, considering how spread out the quills can be, and how easy it can be, especially in the expanded worlds, to miss some of them. Yes, notes in Kazooie and Tooie were needed for progression, but at the very least they didn't lock you out of being able to get the main collectible needed to go into the worlds. And even Donkey Kong 64, with as overindulgent in its collectibles as it could get, only forced you to pick up 75 out of 100 bananas for each Kong in each stage in order to get a banana medal. Picking up all 200 quills in each world, especially after you have nothing left to spend them on, makes them feel pretty darn useless and tedious. Second, the Ghost Riders. Like I said, they're the stand-in for Jinjos in this game. There are 5 different colored ghosts in each world, and if you find all 5 of them, you get a Pagey. What makes them unique, though, is that you have to use different means of catching each ghost depending on their color. With the exception of one color, they won't just stand still and let you catch them. Sometimes you need to feed them something. Other times you need to fight them. Hell, one color is totally invisible until you hit them with a sonar shot first. This is charming and interesting in the first couple of worlds, but it becomes very annoying in later worlds where you have to fight one of them in an enclosed space, or feeding one of them becomes harder when he's further away from a food source, and so on and so forth. And third, the recurring challenges, specifically ones requiring you to find a one-of-a-kind thing to even unlock the challenge. Rextro and Dr. Puzz are the big offenders here. Rextro keeps 2 pages in each world locked in his arcade machine, and he won't let you play the challenges until you first find a Rextro coin hidden somewhere in that world. And Dr. Puzz can't transform you, locking you out of 1 or 2 challenges in each world until you find her Mollycool. I'll be honest, I stopped playing Rextro's games after the second one in my first playthrough, and I didn't see any of Dr. Puzz's transformations beyond the first worlds because I just couldn't be arsed to keep looking for the coin and the cool over and over again. It wasn't fun. What makes it worse is that these things were in hard-to-reach or well-hidden locations that made collecting them even more frustrating and tedious. This is one part of the Collect-A-Thon formula that I could have done without, especially considering that it wasn't as egregious in past games in the genre, and when I was just doing platforming challenges and finding puzzles, or even collecting objects scattered around the stage, when there was more than enough of them, I had a lot of fun. But these challenges specifically really turned me off of going back to complete the game 100%, or even attempt challenges that I hadn't before. Maybe if the Rextro arcade machine didn't require the coins, or if they had treated the coins and Mollycools as traditional collectibles the way they had Mumbo tokens in Banjo-Kazooie, that might have worked out a bit better. The game controls pretty good though, very smooth, and I never had a problem pulling off any of the moves in the game. It's a lot of fun rolling around, attacking enemies, climbing and gliding all over the place. It does feel good. Unfortunately, when it comes to the move in this game, I do feel like they dropped the ball. By the time you get to the last 2 stages, Trouser the Snake, only has 1 new move for sale each time, and if you've been diligent in collecting quills, then you'll have more than enough to snatch them up. What's more is that many of these moves felt very situational. Yes, rolling around in a ball is a lot of fun, and of course the higher jump and gliding abilities make platforming in general a lot easier, but things like the Sonar Blast and Sonar Shield are only used in specific situations most of the time. Hell, I almost completely forgot about the Sonar Blast move until I got to the final boss and found out I could use the blast to get rid of the bee swarms he throws at you. It does feel quite a bit like they were struggling to make each new move feel unique and useful, which, to be fair, was a problem that the Banjo games had too, but I would have been totally fine with less moves if my entire arsenal felt a bit more natural and useful throughout the entire game. The game also seems to misunderstand what made certain aspects of its predecessors fun, and seems to think that taking old ideas and either upping their complexity or their quantity automatically translates into quality. The Ghost Rider challenge I mentioned above is a great example of that, but here's another. You remember those quiz challenges you played through near the end of Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie? They were great, weren't they? A fun penultimate challenge where you were tested on how well you'd explored each world and how much you paid attention to the music, characters, and aesthetics of each area. They were a great final challenge leading up to the last confrontation with the final boss in the game. Yooka-Laylee, on the other hand, has you go through this quiz challenge 3 different times, one at the beginning, middle, and end of the game. Every time it's the same sort of setup, and it feels very bare and uninspired. You're asked a series of questions about the game and the worlds you've explored, and you have to get 10 questions right to pass over the bridge and progress. Get 3 questions wrong, and you have to start the quiz over from the beginning. These are not fun at all, and not only lack the sense of fun and finality that the original quiz games had in the Banjo games, but the questions asked also feel pretty damn unfair. There are a lot that will be asked about things that you aren't likely to be paying attention to at that time, mostly about the current totals of pages, quills, or power-ups you've found in total or in each world. And again, you go through this 3 times over the course of the game. The camera is also a bit of an issue. When I was just out and exploring the world itself, I never thought it was too uncooperative, really. But there are certain areas of every world where the camera will suddenly shift or snap to a fixed perspective, usually letting you know that you're in an interesting area that has a challenge to complete. It's very disorienting, and on more than one occasion led to me just walking off the edge of a cliff or misaiming my landing after a particularly troubling jump. And that's to say nothing about how uncooperative it is when you're in tight corridors or tight spaces. I will say that I didn't encounter any big frame drop issues, at least not at critical moments like some other reviewers were pointing out. I don't know if it's because I was playing it on the PS4 or because I downloaded the day one patch, because of course the game had a day one patch. That's one modern game idea that this game embraced wholeheartedly, but I never really ran into any catastrophic frame drops. They did happen, very rarely, but they only ever happened to me when absolutely nothing else was happening. I'd just be walking along a grassy field, no enemies, no obstacles, I wouldn't even be jumping or anything, and then it'd just go slideshow on me for a second. I'll just say that in terms of looks, the game looks really good, when it wants to. Most of the time, the game manages to be fun, colorful, and has a lot of nice details in its art style that brings about the best of its genre and its inspiration. Other times, however, particularly in areas that are more dark and dismal, the graphics just feel, well, closer to the N64 games that inspired it. They don't look terrible or polygonal, they just don't feel nearly as interesting or vibrant as areas like the jungle or the casino. You can say that it's intentional, I mean no one's expecting a swamp to look pretty, but I'd argue that areas like Bubble Gloop Swamp in the original Banjo-Kazooie were plenty vibrant and upbeat for a swamp level. The character designs are also really good, for the most part. I can't think of a character that didn't have a relatively appealing design, and they all look pretty nice, but one thing that bugged me was the limited animation of each character that you came across. They just keep cycling through their stock animations regardless of the situation, and it made them all seem very wooden and lifeless after a while, especially characters that show up in more than one world. Musically, the game is a triumph. No joke, I love just about every track in this game, and ironically, the music is one of the few aspects that doesn't immediately make me think of Banjo-Kazooie. Oh, it's similar in many respects, but not so close that I immediately draw the comparison. It actually feels like it has an identity of its own. It helps that I like pretty much every single track in this game, and they are all a joy to listen to, not just in their respective environments, which they suit perfectly, but also on their own. They're just great. The voice acting, or what passes for it in this game, once again lifts its style right from the Banjo games, with every character speaking in jumbled audio blips randomly assembled to create something that sounds like in-game speech. Much like the game's writing and sense of humor, which is self-referential to the point where the joke really starts to wear thin near the end of the game, if you liked it in the original games, you're going to like it here, but if you don't find it charming, then it's going to definitely get on your nerves. So then, is this game the triumphant return of the Collect-A-Thon platformer that everyone was hoping for? Yes and no. The game is very much in the same vein as Super Mario 64 and the Banjo games, to the point where it just sort of makes me want to play Banjo-Kazooie again. If you were already a fan of these sort of games, you're definitely going to get a lot of enjoyment out of it, despite its constant attempts at trying to be Banjo and Kazooie, and you're going to find it hard to get past that fact, even when you're having fun. If you didn't grow up with these games, well, I will thoroughly admit that as one who loves these sorts of games, that there's nothing here that's going to change your mind if you didn't grow up with them, or if you didn't like these games to begin with. It does what it sets out to do. It brought the old Collect-A-Thon platformer back in a brand new game, but it just doesn't do anything to modernize the formula. This was a game made for a very specific audience. It's obviously a very large audience if the successful Kickstarter is anything to go off of, but the game definitely does not try very hard to reach beyond that audience. I can only hope that if Playtonic does actually go and make the sequel that the characters are always promising throughout the game, that they take into account the criticism this game received and try to more faithfully blend the old and the new together. Well, that's two big Kickstarter retro revival games down. One of them crashed and burned and was a major disappointment, and the other was this game, which has been met with mixed critical reception. I have my fingers crossed for Bloodstained at the moment. Please don't let us down, Iga. Well, thanks for watching. I'm sure that you've all probably already made up your minds about this game by the time I put this video out, but who cares? I like talking about it. Now let's go out on a positive note. Let's play a rousing game of find your backer name in the exceedingly long credits for this game. Yep, like I said, I backed this game, so I am in here, somewhere. I'm right there. There I am, right there. No, to the left. Other left. Up. Now down a bit. There I am. Richard Goombasa Coombs. I helped make this game. Totally did. See you next time, everybody.